I'm JT, and joining us now is Rob Crain, who's a partner at Crain Brogdon Law out of Dallas, Texas, to talk about what's going on here with a new program. It's called Together We Dine, and this is kind of awesome here. It started a national initiative after the George Floyd situation, and it's trying to get folks back together. You know, everybody kind of uniting after it was such a split around this country, as we all saw. Hey, Rob, thanks so much for being with me.
JT, thanks for having me.
So how did you get involved with this? I love the concept.
Together We Dine, it actually predates a little bit George Floyd. We're here in North Texas, me and my colleagues. And as you may recall, we had 5 police officers who were murdered in downtown Dallas. They were protecting peaceful protesters who were marching through downtown Dallas. And it was in the summer of 2016. And they were there to protect these folks who were protesting racial injustice in our country. And a deranged gunman from a parking garage shot and killed 5 of those officers. And what we saw in the aftermath were people talking past one another and not really listening to one another. We sat down, Pastor Richie Butler, who is senior minister at a Methodist church here in Dallas, primarily African-American church. I'm a white middle-aged male. And we were talking about how can we get people to sit down and actually listen to one another. And from there, Together We Dine was born. And it was an in-person time before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hits and this conversation went virtual. And it has just exploded throughout the country and really crossing borders with the virtual format, where we've had hundreds of these events with thousands of tabletop discussions with people talking about things they don't normally talk about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you get together and have this Together We Dine actually come to fruition and get people together. I remember when Quincy Jones produced the album for We Are the World, and so many different artists came in to do it into the studio. I think we've all seen the videos of how that production happened. He said to everybody, check your egos at the door before you come into the studio. So in this case, are you basically telling people to check their political correctness at the door and come in and have real frank discussions about what's on your mind?
Absolutely. And what we tell everybody at the beginning is, hey, this is a listening exercise. And the reason it's a listening exercise is that because in America and throughout the world, look, we all had different parents, we all had different neighborhoods, we all had different influencers in our life. So guess what? We all had different opinions. And that's the way it should be. That's the way God made us. But what we learn when we listen to one another is that even though we may have a different opinion from how to get to point A to point B, once we listen to each other long enough, we realize, you know what? We're all trying to get to point B. We just have different ideas on how to get there. And let's just take that example of a police officer pulls somebody over on a stop. We all want that police officer to leave that stop safely. And we want that person who's pulled over on a stop to leave that stop safely. Now, we all may have different ideas on what's happened in the world and policing and whether there needs to be any kind of changes in regards to policing, but we all want that to happen, where that is the norm and that we're consistent with it. But once we listen to each other long enough, we'll hear, okay, we're all trying to get there. Now we can civilly talk through our opinions on things. So yes, and I remember that well. Check the ego at the door. And this is open your ears at the table.
I like it. I like it. Now, you mentioned that we are all different. God created us this way. And I worked in a youth ministry for years, for about 6 years, and helping high school kids make decisions based on their relationship with Christ and not the world. And one thing that came out of that all the time was, there are some people that have the best intentions for kids, and whether it's their parents, their teachers, their coaches, even their pastors, but yet they're all human beings. And the only person that's never let me down has been Jesus Christ. And opinions matter and opinions count when it comes to helping groom folks and have frank discussions and moving to a better place on the second half of that discussion. But the only opinion that really matters is God's opinion. So do you go to God in some of these discussions to talk about how does God want us to handle an angry situation, or be compassionate when approaching somebody you pull over, or respecting authority and that type of thing when it comes to law enforcement?
In these conversations that we've had throughout the world and mainly in the United States here, we've had them all over, and we've had them in many. In fact, our very first was in a United Methodist church with a predominantly white church and a predominantly black church coming together. We've also had them at Muslim community centers and so forth. So we have all religions, all faiths, people who don't have faith in these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And what we try to impart, though, to your point, is that we're all part of the human race. We're all here on this planet together. We're all in the same humanity, part of the same humanity. And that if you listen to each other, you're going to learn something each and every time that you sit down at this table. And what happens in this transformation of listening is two emotions for people who really have this conversation for the first time. The first emotion that you have is you have the emotion of relief, of I can have this conversation. I don't have to be afraid of saying the wrong thing, because everybody here at this table is here with an open heart, and I can have this conversation and not be afraid of it.
Yeah.
And the second emotion people have is excitement. And I see it every time. I saw it with my wife in her first conversation. I did it myself. Their heart rate goes up. They are so excited that we can take this conversation away from the loud noises on social media, the loud noises on television and political discussion. And we can have this conversation back where it belongs. And that is neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend,
right?
New friend to new friend. And it is that, commonality. And it is in many ways a spiritual moment for so many people to be able to have that kind of conversation and freedom in that conversation.
I love it. We're talking with Rob Crain, a partner at Crain Brogdon Law. You'd mentioned that you've done this all over the world. Are you actually physically sitting down with people at dinner? Is this being done on the virtual or, Zoom get-togethers, or all of the above?
Yeah, pretty much all of the above. As I mentioned, it started out, all of it was in person. Boxed lunches, nothing fancy, sandwiches, a bag of chips and so forth. And at any community center or place of employment or anywhere where people can gather. We've been having homeowners associations want to do it with their community. And then with the virtual format that has come to be so big a part of our lives, we've now had Dine events for multinational corporations with their employees from all the, almost all the continents on the planet.
Right.
The same conversation. And one of our large corporations had all of their engineers from India, vice presidential level on up, where they had their own private Dine virtually, and we led that discussion here from the United States.
Okay.
So it's all over, and we're doing them in person and throughout the states here in America, and it's just wonderful.
Rob, it's a great idea. Is there an outline or curriculum as to how to execute this? Do you help people set these up in their own communities, their own companies? If somebody's listening out and says, "Yeah, I'd like to do this Together We Dine program," where do they start, and do they have some guidance from you?
So projectunity.net. Project Unity was founded by Pastor Butler in 2014. Our Together We Dine program is part of Project Unity. You can get there at projectunity.net, and we provide you not only the structure, we'll help you get your first events up and going, where we'll provide facilitators, because we have facilitators who are at each table, whether it's a live table or a virtual table. We provide questions that initiate these discussions, and we provide all of that resource in a very tight package for you and help you get it going very simply. This is not a complicated program. It is sit around a table, listen to each other, answer questions about race that are really about their lives and how their journey in America came about. And then we talk about those answers. And the secret sauce is we just don't ever talk about this. And that's why it's so liberating to have this conversation. But we provide all of that for you, projectunity.net.
What a great idea. Rob Crain, once again, Together We Dine, the program, and Project Unity. Check it out and get your conversations going. Rob, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks for having me, JT.